The gleaming marble of the grand foyer felt like a stage, though Isabella was never meant to be the lead. She stood at the periphery, her posture a masterpiece of manufactured insignificance. Her head bowed so low the white lace of her headband was all the approaching party could see. Lee Jong-jae entered first, his presence a physical weight in the room, his suit sharp enough to cut glass, yet unable to hide the dark ink of Busan's underworld creeping up his neck. Beside him walked Mi-suk, the matriarch, draped in cream hanbok and an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. As they drew level, the hotel manager's voice trembled, urging the invisible staff to show proper respect. Isabella stepped forward, the tray in her hands steady as stone. She didn't offer the rehearsed English welcome. Instead, she dropped into a deep, traditional bow that belonged to a different era and a different continent. To serve the mother of the dragon is to find honor in the shadow of the mountain. Respected elder, she murmured. The words weren't just Korean. They were delivered in a Busan dialect so thick, so raw, and so authentic it carried the salt of the Jigaki fish markets. The effect was instantaneous. Jong-jae froze mid-step, his hand twitching toward his jacket. The security detail, a wall of identical dark suits, went rigid, their confusion masking a sudden, sharp alarm. But it was Mi-suk who reacted most profoundly. She stopped, her neutral expression shattering as she stared at the black woman who had just spoken the ghost tongue of her youth. Silence, heavy and suffocating, swallowed the lobby. The invisible maid had finally been seen. Her life was one of back stairwell duty, a world of service elevators and hidden arteries where she could watch and listen without ever truly being seen. She was an anomaly, too black for the traditionalists and too Korean for the locals, caught between two worlds and belonging fully to neither. This isolation was her greatest asset, providing the perfect cover for a woman trained in survival by the streets of Busan. The arrival of Lee Jong-jae, the Dragon of Busan, transformed the estate into a fortress. Security men with cold eyes and hidden weapons took every entrance, their presence a reminder that the Lee family's empire was built on blood rather than kindness. Isabella watched from the periphery as Jong-jae stepped out, a man with visible neck tattoos and a gaze that calculated the worth of everyone in his path. He was the heir to a kingdom of broken bones, and as he entered, Isabella adjusted her tray, her hands steady as she prepared to step from the shadows into the light of his dangerous world. To the other staff at the Lee estate, Isabella was a phantom in a starched apron, a woman of few words who moved with a silence that bordered on the unnatural. While the other maids gossiped in the service corridors, Isabella maintained a uniform of shadows, carefully cultivating the invisibility the hotel management demanded. Every morning, she donned her classic black and white uniform, a garment that acted as both a shield and a mask, allowing her to move through the gilded halls of the elite while being utterly ignored. Her life was one of back stairwell duty, a world of service elevators and hidden arteries where she could watch and listen without ever truly being seen. She was an anomaly, too black for the traditionalists and too Korean for the locals, caught between two worlds and belonging fully to neither. This isolation was her greatest asset, providing the perfect cover for a woman trained in survival by the streets of Busan. The arrival of Lee Jong-jae, the Dragon of Busan, transformed the estate into a fortress. Security men with cold eyes and hidden weapons took every entrance, their presence a reminder that the Lee family's empire was built on blood rather than kindness. Isabella watched from the periphery as Jong-jae stepped out, a man with visible neck tattoos and a gaze that calculated the worth of everyone in his path. He was the heir to a kingdom of broken bones, and as he entered, Isabella adjusted her tray, her hands steady as she prepared to step from the shadows into the light of his dangerous world. The porcelain of the teapot was still warm against Isabella's palm, but the air in the garden had turned ice cold. Mi-suk's mention of Park Sang-min wasn't just a question, it was a ghost reaching out from the grave. Isabella felt the weight of her hidden knife tucked against her thigh, the same blade her foster father had given her before the fires took him. She began to pour the second round of tea, her movements a forced meditation. He was a good man, motherly. He taught me that a person's value is found in their loyalty, not their skin. Zhang Jie narrowed his eyes, his hand tracing the edge of his jaw where a scar disappeared into his collar. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words were swallowed by a sudden, jarring silence. The ambient hum of the estate, the distant whir of lawnmowers, the chatter of security, had vanished. Isabella's ears, trained by a decade of hypervigilance, caught the subtle click of a frequency jammer. Then, the scent hit her. It wasn't the floral notes of the tea, but the sharp, acrid bite of cordite and the heavy smell of unburned fuel. "Get down," Isabella commanded. Her voice was no longer that of a submissive maid. It was the gravelly rasp of a lieutenant. She didn't wait for them to react. As a window on the upper balcony shattered with a crystalline scream, Isabella lunged forward. She grabbed the heavy mahogany tea table, flipping it with a strength that defied her frame to create a barricade. A split second later, a hail of suppressed gunfire shredded the paper screens where Misuk had been sitting. The scent of gunpowder filled the air, and the invisible maid was gone, replaced by the warrior the Park family had forged in the fires of Busan. The tea garden, once a sanctuary of tradition, transformed into a kill zone. Isabella didn't hesitate. While the elite guards outside were likely already dead or compromised, she became a blur of black and white fabric. With a guttural shout in the Busan tongue, a war cry that made Zhang Jie's blood run cold, she hauled Misuk behind the overturned mahogany table just as a second volley of lead chewed the wood into splinters. "Stay low and breathe," Isabella commanded, her voice dropping into a low, tactical rasp. Zhang Jie reached for his waistband, but Isabella was faster. She reached into the hidden folds of her apron and produced a customized semi-automatic, throwing it to the Mafia boss. "Use it. Your own men are the ones shooting." "How do you?" Zhang Jie started, but his words were cut off by the sound of boots on gravel. Isabella didn't answer. She pulled a ceramic tea bowl from the floor and hurled it toward the entrance. As the hidden assassin shifted his aim to the noise, Isabella lunged from behind the table. She moved with the ghost step of the Busan docks, low, lethal, and silent. Before the gunman could recalibrate, she was under his guard. She drove her palm into his chin and followed with a surgical strike to the throat. As the man collapsed, Isabella stood over him, her maid's lace headband slightly askew, her eyes burning with a decade of suppressed fury. She looked back at the stunned Zhang Jie and his trembling mother. "The perimeter is breached, and the security feed is looped," she said, checking the dead man's earpiece. "If you want to live, you follow me." Now, for the first time in his life, the Dragon of Busan found himself taking orders from the woman he had walked past 100 times without a second glance. Isabella led them into the servants' pantry, a cramped space smelling of industrial detergent. While Zhang Jie scanned for threats, Isabella reached behind a row of heavy flour sacks and pressed a hidden lever. A section of the wall groaned and slid back, revealing a narrow, concrete stairwell that led deep into the estate's foundation. At the bottom lay a room that looked more like a military command center than a maid's quarters. One wall was covered in flickering monitors showing every blind spot in the estate. Another was a collage of photographs, financial ledgers, and maps pinned with red string. "What is this?" Misuk whispered, her eyes widening as she recognized her own handwriting on a ledger Isabella had intercepted months ago. "My 10-year project," Isabella replied, tossing her lace headband onto a table littered with surveillance equipment. "I knew the coup was coming before you did, Zhang Jie. Your loyal enforcer, Choi, has been selling your routes to the Seoul Syndicate." She pulled a floorboard up, revealing a crate of tactical gear. "I've lived in your shadows, recording every betrayal. This isn't just a safe house. It's the evidence that will burn your enemies to the ground." Isabella pulled a high-resolution photograph from the wall and slammed it onto the table. It showed a man in a tailored suit, his face partially obscured by a cigarette, meeting a shadowed figure in a rain-slicked alley. "Choi," Zhang Jie hissed, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the tactical table. "He's been with my family for 20 years. 20 years of resentment," Isabella countered, her eyes cold. "He didn't just sell your routes. He's the one who provided the blueprint for this estate's security. But look closer at the signature on the wire transfer logs." She pointed to a digital encryption key displayed on a monitor, a specific, archaic sequence of characters. That's the spider's knot, Isabella said, her voice trembling with a decade of suppressed grief. It's the same signature left on the digital accounts of my foster father, Park Sang-min, the night his house was burned. Choi didn't just betray you. He worked with the men who murdered my family to clear the path for his own rise. The revelation hung in the air like a death sentence. The traitor wasn't just a business rival. He was the architect of their shared misery. Mi-suk stepped away from the monitors, her gaze drifting from the digital screens to the woman standing before them. The chaos upstairs seemed miles away as she reached into the hidden pocket of her hanbok. She pulled out a small silk pouch, extracting a weathered jade pendant carved in the shape of a leaping tiger, the sigil of the old Busan Guard. Park Sang-min didn't just have a student, Mi-suk whispered, her voice thick with realization. He had a daughter of the heart. He told me once about a girl who saw through the invisible world better than any man he'd ever trained. She took Isabella's hand, pressing the cool stone into her palm. This belonged to his wife. He sent it to me for safekeeping the night. He knew the fire was coming. He said if I ever met a woman who spoke with the salt of the docks and the soul of a tiger, I was to give it back. Isabella closed her fingers around the jade, the weight of it grounding her. For 10 years, she had been a ghost, a maid, a spy. But as Mi-suk bowed her head in a gesture of deep, familial respect, the uniform of shadows finally fell away. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was the rightful heir to a legacy of honor that Choi and his traitors could never understand. I am Isabella, she said, her voice resonant and clear. And today, the tiger wakes up. Isabella knew that the only way to reach Choi was to use the very weapon he had ignored for years, her perceived insignificance. While Zhang Jie's remaining loyalists prepared a frontal assault on the downtown Manhattan high-rise where Choi was consolidating power, Isabella arrived through the service entrance. She wore a generic catering uniform, her hair tucked under a net, her face devoid of the warrior's fire she had shown in the basement. To the armed guards at the freight elevator, she was just another worker delivering late-night meals. They didn't even look at her eyes as she pushed a heavy silver cart past them. Inside the cart, hidden beneath layers of linen and hors d'oeuvres, was a high-frequency jammer and a silenced pistol. As she reached the executive floor, she moved with predatory grace. She didn't need to break down doors. She had the master key codes she had intercepted months ago. She slipped into the server room, the heart of Choi's digital fortress. With a few keystrokes, she initiated a ghost protocol, looping the security cameras and unlocking the heavy mahogany doors of Choi's private office. As the traitor sat at his desk, gloating over a screen full of stolen assets, the lights flickered and died. He looked up to see a silhouette in a service uniform standing in the doorway, the jade tiger pendant glowing faintly around her neck. The invisible world is finished with you, Choi, she whispered. Choi lunged for the weapon on his desk, but a single shot from Isabella's silenced pistol hissed through the dark, shattering his hand. He fell back, howling, as the emergency lights flickered to life, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. Isabella stood over him, the barrel of her weapon steady. For 10 years, I saw your face in my nightmares, she said, her voice a calm, terrifying contrast to his frantic whimpering. I watched you build a throne on the ashes of my father's house. The doors burst open. Zhang Jie and his men flooded in, their faces grim. Zhang Jie looked at the broken man on the floor, then at Isabella. He raised his own gun to finish it, but Isabella stepped into his line of fire. No, she said firmly. Blood only breeds more ghosts. I didn't gather 10 years of evidence just to become a murderer. He goes to the authorities with the files I've decrypted. He'll spend the rest of his life in a cage, watching his empire turn to dust. Weeks later, the Lee estate was quiet once more. Isabella stood on the balcony, no longer wearing the black and white uniform, but a suit of deep navy. Mi-suk approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. The world saw a maid, Mi-suk said softly. But we found a daughter. Will you stay, Min-ji? Isabella looked out over the horizon, the jade tiger pendant resting against her heart. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was the bridge between two worlds, the silent guardian who had finally found her voice. I'll stay, she replied. But from now on, I work in the light.